Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Sailors Creek Battlefield Historical State Park. My name is Ranger Lee Wilcox, and this is part 2 of our Rocking Chair Reflections program on Civil War uniforms. If you missed part 1, if you have a chance, please go back and take a look at it. It gives an introduction to this subject on Civil War uniforms and how to interpret all of the information that's being portrayed on a uniform, everything from buttons to collar trim to the design on the hat or the sleeves. But we're going to continue on. Just to give you a quick refresher, for those of y'all that did see part 1, remember the 3 branches of service: the infantry, the artillery, and the cavalry, and then their color and symbol designators. If you remember, the artillery was represented by cross cannons, the infantry, the hunting horn, and the cavalry was represented by cross sabers, and they were also color coded. And that was this chart here we refer to. So there's your hunting horn for the infantry, and they were represented by the color light blue. Artillery, cross cannons, color red, and cavalry, cross sabers in the color yellow. And here again, where that color comes into play is somewhere on their uniform, whether it was a hat, a collar trim, a cuff on their sleeves. Even their rank insignia would indicate what branch of service they were in: infantry, artillery, or cavalry. So we finished up on part 1, covering all of the federal officer ranks, and we're going to start off today's program with the Confederate side of things, because they did it a little different on their end. And so we're going to go over the same officers, the same names, but just different symbols. And so the first set for the Confederate rank, this is the second lieutenant working from the bottom up. So you have second lieutenant at the bottom, then you have first lieutenant, and then you have a captain. And these were worn on the soldiers' collars, just like this uniform I've got on. The symbol here, that is a rank insignia, which we'll cover in just a little bit. But this is where the Confederate officers wore their ranks, or on the collar. And that was on these type of symbols here. They were horizontal bars on the collar. So like I said, these bars indicated second lieutenant, first lieutenant, and then captain. Now here's where there's a big divergence between the Confederacy and the Federal Army. On the Federal Army side, when you get involved with stars, it was only for generals. But over here on the Confederate side, stars were prevalent in officer ranks. And so here is a star structure, and these are 3 different ranks. The first one being at the bottom here is the rank of major. And if you notice, that's what I have on in this uniform. It's not a general, it's a major's rank. It's 1 star. 2 stars indicated a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army, and 3 stars indicated a colonel in the Confederate Army. Now, once you get into the general ranks, whether it was a brigadier general or a major general, lieutenant general, or a general of the army, you still had a representation of stars, but you also had this added feature. So all those general ranks that I just mentioned were identified by the 3 stars, and in addition, the gold laurel wreath around those stars. That covered all general ranks. So that was the Confederate side of things. To give you an idea of some examples of these uniforms that I'm talking about, and we're going to cover both Federal as well as Confederate, and where they share commonalities but also where they differ, is, for example, let's just start off with infantry. On a Federal uniform, example here, this here is a sergeant major's rank, and based on what we've talked about, the sergeant major's rank, you notice that color, that light blue, that's going to indicate infantry. Now, for an artillery soldier, on this Confederate jacket, you notice the color red is on the collar. Red is artillery. Now, to add to this, you have a corresponding kepi. This hat here, it's red in color. It goes with this uniform. That was indicative of the artillery soldier. It could have easily been a blue uniform representing one from the Federal Army, but it still would have had like this red trim for the collar or the hat. Sometimes the cuffs of the sleeve are red. Next up is cavalry. And remember, the cavalry has the yellow color. So what we have here is a cavalry jacket with yellow sergeant stripes. Also has a little pinstripe on the cuff of the sleeve. But that yellow indicates cavalry. Also, on this forage hat, you have the cross saber symbol representing cavalry. On the officer side of things, with the Confederates, I was referring to those bars and how they were horizontal on the collars for the lieutenants and the captain. This here is a Confederate officer's coat. If you notice, these are the bars I'm talking about. It's on the collar. It's not on the sleeves. It's not on the shoulders like on a federal officer's uniform. It's on the collar, and that was unique to the Confederates. And then for the rank of captain, those are 3 individual bars. If it was a second lieutenant, it would be just 1 bar. If it was a first lieutenant, it would be 2 bars, and the captain had 3 bars. Now, on the federal side, I was referring to shoulder straps in part 1. And what I mean by these shoulder straps, here is a federal jacket. This is the soldier looking at you, and this is a shoulder strap. It goes from front to back on the shoulder. So, like an example of my shoulder, the shoulder strap runs along the front to back side of that shoulder. So this is a shoulder strap, and you can see that it has a blue field that's indicative of infantry, and then it has 1 gold bar. Now, back during the Civil War, we talked about earlier too, was that modern military, a single gold bar is a second lieutenant. But during the Civil War, the second lieutenant's rank was just a plain rectangle with no symbol of rank in it at all. So in this case, because there is a bar in it, the single bar, that is indicative of a first lieutenant in the Civil War's case. Even though it's gold, it's still considered a first lieutenant. And here again with the branch of service indicator, this is that shoulder strap design where I was telling you now that it's here, it's blue. If it was red, you still would have had the first lieutenant's bar, but the field here would have been red. If it was cavalry, it would have been yellow. So that's how you had the branch of service designators. This uniform I'm wearing, so if you were a junior grade officer, lieutenant, and then up to captain, there was generally just a single row of buttons on your uniform coat. When you get into the senior level officers, the buttons increased. So for like a major and lieutenant colonel, you had double-breasted buttons like this uniform here. And again, which I said before, these 2 stars on my collar, 1 on each side, is indicative of a major. It's not a general. That's the U.S. military star is a general. On the Confederate side, this is indicative of a major. I'm portraying a unit of the Richmond Home Guard, the Richmond Defense or Richmond Reserves. These are the guys that were in charge of protecting the city of Richmond and got caught up in the Appomattox campaign when Richmond and Petersburg had to be evacuated in the flight west across to eventually the surrender at Appomattox. Now, here at Sailor's Creek, it was the first taste of battle that these guys that were the Richmond Defense Forces, Richmond Reserves or the Home Guard, they saw action here at Sailor's Creek. It was their first and only fight, and they were surrounded and captured and taken prisoner here at Sailor's Creek. And so that's what's being represented here as a major from that particular unit. So we're almost finished up here. What I'd like to do, though, is propose a challenge for you at home. So we've covered Federal Army ranks from the Civil War and Confederate Army ranks in the Civil War and discussed how they differ. What I'd like to see for you guys to do, if you're up to the challenge, is come up with your own ranks. Invent your own army there at your house. Design your own symbols to determine which rank you're representing. Whatever your fancy is. It doesn't have to be a star. It doesn't have to be an oak leaf. It can be anything you want. Come up with your own color codes for your branches of service, infantry, artillery, cavalry. Design your own uniform color. It doesn't have to be blue. It doesn't have to be gray. But have some fun. Design something. See what you can come up with and challenge yourself. So that wraps it up for our Civil War uniform segment of Rocking Chair Reflections here at Sailors Creek Battlefield, Historical State Park. I hope you enjoyed this program. Again, if you get a chance, take in part 1 so that part 1 and 2 together make a whole lot more sense. And thank you for tuning in. Give us feedback. Let us know if you like these video presentations, and not just here at the battlefield, but all across Virginia State Parks and all of the rangers that are contributing to the video presentations, whether they're historical or cultural based or nature based programs. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you have a good day.